for his presentation, which is going to be the last one of today, and actually for the whole seminar. So Kalle is our MA student in sound design, and could say that he's somehow specialized on using VR tools and making like own tools of yours, I would say.
I don't know if that's a little bit too much to say about me, but I try to make my own tools also. At least to use other people's tools in the ways that I feel comfortable with them. But hello, my name is Kalle, as Tommy said. Thank you all for being here. And today my topic is going to be Alone Together. This is actually pretty weird. I was just talking with Atte downstairs, and he said that he did a work with the same name 2 years ago or 3 years ago, and we were talking about the name. But basically the subtext is going to be my personal journey into the world of virtual art. So I would like to start off by saying that I'm not a professional in any way. I'm not someone who can say that this is right and this is wrong. I'm not someone who's going to tell you that this is interesting in virtual reality, this is not interesting. Or I am going to tell you those things, but those are just my opinions, and you can disagree or agree as much as you want. And if you have any comments or any questions or anything, just please stop me. I don't want to be I don't want this position to be like I'm in power of you guys, because you are more smart than I am, especially as I heard. So let's see. Today the sort of like smaller topics or bigger topics, however you want to say it, are going to be inspiration. So what inspired me in this journey into the virtual reality. I'm going to tell you a little bit about my previous works in the field of virtual reality. Then we get to the sort of meat and potatoes, or I mean, we live in 2017 and everyone knows that meat industry is shit, so let's just say this is the tofu and potatoes and stuff like that. And then I'm going to talk you about, this is a little bit on the way. I can read you what I've found. So what are the sort of things that I feel that are interesting to me personally in virtual reality. And maybe some of those might be interesting to other people also, but at least they're interesting to me. And then what's next, if we have time to get to that. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that is still to be done in the field of virtual reality. But let's start from inspiration. And I don't know if this is a little bit awkward to talk about this now after the last conversation, but video games. And I'm not going to go into the whole conversation about guns and shooting in video games, because I hate killing things. I mean, I don't want to kill anything. I don't want to kill animals, I don't want to kill people, but still I play video games where you kill stuff. So for me, that's just my personal opinion. I can make the division between the virtual and the physical, actual, real, but I'm not saying that it's not a problematic thing. But yeah, these are just my inspirations, how I came to this. This is my journey. Feels like I'm trying to make myself sound really interesting. Okay, so let's continue. So first off, we have the gun there, but first thing that actually inspired me when I was like 7, 8 years old was HalfLife, which is a game where you shoot things, but also it's a game which has really good story, really good narrative in it. And I've always felt like the shooting part and the action parts are just like gaps between actually advancing in the story and finding out more about the world. And I think HalfLife was one of the first, if not the first game that actually created an interesting virtual world where you could sunk your hours and where you would shoot things, but at the same time you would learn more about the world. And then of course HalfLife 2, which is the best game ever. And that's not my opinion, that's just like objective opinion. And if there's any HalfLife fans in the audience, you all know the sadness that comes with the knowing that there will not be a continuum or the next part of this series. It sort of like ended ended into this huge cliffhanger, and it never continued. So, okay. And then Portal, I was just saying to Kimmo that there's also games that you don't have to shoot anything. In Portal you kind of shoot, but you only shoot portals, which you can go through, so it's like puzzle game, so you don't kill anything, you don't have to kill anyone during the whole game. And Portal 2. And they're just like I said, they're just, I don't even know how to start to describe those worlds that are created in those worlds. They feel so alive, and they feel so meaningful, and they feel so, all the stories in them feel just so, I don't know, compelling to me. And I don't know why I'm talking about it so much, but I never got the opportunity to talk about HalfLife, so now I have it, and you have to listen to me. You have to respect this. This is sort of the... And also one of the things about HalfLife 2 is that there's a female character that is definitely not sexualized. She's not the object of the, like, I don't know, desperate horniness of teenage boys, which is usually the case, which I hope it's changing, but it's changing slowly. But HalfLife 2 has a meaningful female character that is also meaningful for the story and can survive by herself, so that's one of the reasons I think it's a really good game. And like I said, in Portal you don't have to shoot people, or you don't have to shoot robots or animals or anything. You can just shoot the portals into the space and go through one and come out of the other one. So that's
you are a female character.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. You are a female character and not sexualized in any way. And that's one of the, like, Portal, I think as a game, it raises really interesting questions about the virtual reality and about reality. Like, I think, well, I'm going to come back to this topic, but personally I don't think that recreating real life is interesting in the virtual world. I think that bending the laws of physics and bending the laws of social structures, that's interesting in the virtual world. So I think Portal, in a way, it destroys the, I don't know, destroys the need to believe that this is like the world I live in, because it's sci-fi, but in more in a way that you don't just shoot aliens and that's the sci-fi part. It's sort of like you can bend reality in that game. And yeah, there's some more pictures. But why I'm talking about these 4 games is because they're all made by Valve Software, which is a game company in the United States. And why Valve Software is interesting in this is because in 2016 the HTC Vive was released. The HTC Vive was released, which is this virtual set that I'm using. But the HTC part is not interesting. The technology part here is not interesting. What is interesting is the Steam VR part, which is done by Valve. So how I got into virtual reality was actually I heard that Valve is going to make a virtual reality headset. And at that moment I knew that this is going to be a big deal, because Valve doesn't do bad things, it only does good things. I mean, in the way, I'm not saying that they're a perfect company, but like the products that they do are, I don't want to go to the entertainment/art question, but they're more art than entertainment to me. But yeah, when I heard that Valve is going to make a headset, or they're making the technology for the headset, HTC is just putting it together and selling it, I knew that it's going to be a really good thing, and it's going to actually work, and it's going to be interesting, and it's going to change the world in some way, at least. And I'm going to talk about how it's changing the world and why I'm doing stuff for it later, because I think it's really important as an artist to do stuff in there, because let's face it, it's going to change the world. Okay, so I could talk about a lot of other games also, like story-wise, like BioShock or Life is Strange or that kind of games. You know, if you have played those, why I should talk about them. But one game that actually really changed my perspective in narrative, in interactive media and in video games was the Stanley Parable, which is also a game where you don't shoot anyone. It's just sort of like, people call it the walking simulator, where you just walk around and you go to a room and then you go to another room and then something happens. And but what's interesting in the Stanley Parable is that you have a narrator who's telling you what is happening. So Stanley is in his office and he's weirded out by the fact that he hasn't gotten any assignments or he hasn't met any co-workers in a while. So he starts investigating his office. And the narrator is telling all the time what Stanley is doing, and there's parts like he comes to, he's walking on a hallway and he sees two doors in there. And the narrator says that Stanley goes through the left door, but you don't have to go through the left door, you can go through the right door if you want to. And then the narrator adapts to that and gets annoyed to you and gets, I don't know, he tries to kill you at some point or something like that. But here's the whole structure of the whole thing. So the red one is where you start, and then you have all those other options, and all the blue ones are the different endings in that game. And it's really simple, both technically and I think it's also like it's not something that it's not like Shakespeare or anything, but it's just it works really good. So that's why I think it's really important piece of virtual art. And continuing from that, from the same maker, is the beginner's guide, which is, I think this is the most essential piece of virtual reality, or not virtual reality, but virtual art in the whole world. Some people think that it's a little bit pretentious, but I mean, that's what people say about everything. So everyone has their own opinion. I'm not saying it's the greatest thing ever, but for me it's the greatest thing ever. So the beginner's guide it's really interesting in a way that it's sort of like we're studying in a theater school, or I'm studying in a theater school, and you all are sitting at the theater school now, and we're always doing like stuff in a process. We're never doing anything ready. But this is a little bit, I mean, some people do something ready, but usually it's sort of like you have this demonstration or you have this idea and you want to try it out, and usually it's more interesting than actually creating a ready piece of art. So not Stanley Parable, but the beginner's guide is sort of using that idea that there's 13 maps in the game, and each of those is sort of like a miniature game in itself. That is, usually it has only like one observation about interaction, or one idea or one law that you have to follow, like you can only walk backwards or something like that. And it's really technically simple, but it's just like, I don't know, the story is, for me, it's really well written, and it went pretty deep inside me. Like as an artist, or I still feel pretty weird calling myself an artist, but let's see. Let's say I'm an artist now. Let's live in this virtual reality where I am an artist. So for me as an artist, it spoke pretty deeply, because all the themes are about how hard it is to somehow open yourself up to the world, and how hard it is to, I don't know, somehow accept that you are also in connection with other people, and how your motives might not be, even though I'm sort of like, I do art for myself only, but still, I mean, if someone says something nice about my art, it still feels good. So I think most of the people are like that, and it's totally okay, but it's pretty hard to accept that I'm actually just doing this partly for others also, not just for myself. And yeah, there's some theater scenes, so I had to put that screenshot on because we're in a theater school. And yeah, I don't want to spoil the game too much, because I want all of you, or at least some of you who have computers, I want you to play this game. It's 1.5 hours, so it's not going to take too long. And maybe you're not going to like it, maybe you will like it, maybe you see some value in it, maybe you won't see any value in it. But for me, it's just it's a really interesting piece, and sort of the thing that really got me into the idea that I can create something in virtual reality, or I can create something in digital world, because all of the things that you see there, they're visually really simple, and they're mechanically really simple, and it sort of like demystifies the whole video game industry. Like, you don't have to be some experienced coder or artist or anything to create art in virtual reality or virtual worlds. Because you can actually just, if you have the good idea, it can be really simple and you can create it. So that's why I think the beginner's guide is, for me, it's sort of like the beginner's guide. So it began, my journey to creating stuff began from playing this game. I had the seed inside me before that, planted by those previous things that I mentioned, but this was the thing that actually made the flower grow, or I don't know if it's a flower or a weed or something, but all right, let's not talk about that anymore. And yeah, then there's this one concept that is, it's sort of a blessing. Once again, just for me personally, it's sort of a blessing, but at the same time it's making my life a little bit hard from time to time. But it's 3 letters, DIY, do it yourself. Because I come from like hardcore punk background, so we played music, we organized gigs, we recorded our own records, and we did everything by ourselves. And I'm not even saying that that's the most important thing. I think this is sort of like I've been in therapy or something, but I think my father also plays a big part in this. He's a musician, he plays children's music, and he does everything by himself. He does his own accounting and his own gig booking, and he drives the car and he plays the music and he makes the music and he records the music and everything like that. So I think I've learned that way of doing things from my father. But yeah, like I said, it's a good thing because I'm not too afraid to tackle those kinds of things. Like if there's something that I want to do, I learn how to do it. But at the same time, it's really hard for me to ask help from people who actually know what I should be doing. So I'm just like banging my head against the wall and finding out the way, like, I don't know, after a couple of weeks or a year or something. But if I just asked someone to help me, it would be a lot easier. But at the same time, it creates interesting things if you just find your own way and do things wrong, in a way. Okay, so my previous works, just briefly about this. The first thing that I did in the virtual reality that was actually shown to people was Modern Ancient. That was on display at the VES 30 years anniversary exhibition in Suvilahti 1 year ago. And it basically came from an idea that I just want to create a perfect floating cube. Because that's something that you can't have in real life. You can't bring a perfect floating cube to the stage and be in interaction with it. I mean, you can have something hanging from a line, but it will still be hanging from a line, and it's not going to be perfect in that way. And yeah, it was a really simple thing, but it sort of gave me courage to continue in this way, that I actually knew that I can produce something that is maybe even enjoyable by some people. There was one 7-year-old kid who didn't want to come out. He was screaming to his mommy that he doesn't want to come out there. So that made me feel like, okay, maybe there's something valuable here, even though it's really simple. And then Ocean Vortex, which was my bachelor's artistic project last spring. And yeah, I have to thank, I didn't do all the things in Ocean Vortex. I had help from Anna-Stina Haapasaari, who was helping me with the writing of the thing and sort of like co-directing the thing. And also Santeri Suominen, who's my roommate, and he's more of like, he studies aesthetics, so he helped me with sort of like the philosophical issues with the whole thing. And oh yeah, I have video also there, so we can watch that in the background. So Ocean Vortex was sort of like, I wanted to create something bigger into virtual reality. I wanted to, I mean, I'm still in school, so I don't have any responsibilities in a way. I can fail, and I have to fail. If I don't fail, I haven't tried. So I try to just, you know, run towards the wall as fast as I can and see if I can go through or not. And luckily I went through, and it didn't hurt too much. So it was actually a pretty good experience. But yeah, I want to create something that is just a larger scale and has some sort of narrative, or not even narrative, but at least some sort of dramaturgy in it. So it's not just like, and I'm not saying that installations are are somehow lesser art form than things that have dramaturgy in them. I wanted to create something that is more than just a thing where you go inside and you spend some time there and then you come out. I wanted to create something that has an actual sort of like time and space and all that sort of, creating an alternative timeline for the reality. And what more can I say about Ocean Vortex? It's about 13 to 20 minutes long, depending on the people or the person who's watching it. This is just a shortened version. You won't see all the things that are actually in the virtual world. But yeah, I just wanted to explore as much as I could. So I created 4 different scenes in there that are completely different from each other, both visually and interactively. And the world is sort of like filled with this meaningless interaction in a way that you're interacting with the world all the time, but you might not even notice it. I mean, there's at least one thing in the last scene. Can I rewind it? No, I can't. Oh, sorry. Anyway, there's this one scene where, oh, I can, here. So in this part where you know, not in this. Okay, let's forget about it. There's this one thing where you control the sound with your controllers, and there was only one person out of the 105, 106 who have seen the thing, or I think it's more than that. But only one person actually noticed how you can play with it. So I wanted it to be sort of like that you can find it. Because once again, I come from the video game culture, so Easter eggs are the best thing for me. I love those. So I want to create sort of like interactive world, but you didn't have to know that you're acting with the world all the time. But then there is those things that are really self-explanatory, like this, that you touch the ball and it sticks to your hand, and you move the ball around. So there's interaction in there that is sort of hidden, and then there's interaction that is really visible and affects the world and affects the narrative in a way. What more can I say about Ocean Vortex? Well, maybe we'll come back to that later. So let's get to the tofu now. So Alone Together is the piece that I have now, that I made during the last couple of weeks or months or something. I don't really know when the process started, and it definitely hasn't ended yet, so I still have a lot to do there. But it's a good proof of concept at the moment. And the initial ideas I had for this, I thank you for Suopo and Tomi for asking me to come here, and Tia for helping me with this like scheduling and stuff. But the initial ideas that I had, I was actually having a little bit trouble coming up with something to present here, like something to create in the virtual reality. And I actually came up with the idea as I was walking here to present my idea to Tomi and Suopo and Tia. So this was all sort of like, I just wrote it down really quickly, 5 points that sounded interesting to me. And the 5 points are sort of like pseudo multiplayer. I'm going to explain all of these later, but I'm just going to put them up for now. 2 persons share a virtual space, something I hadn't done before. Visualizing movement, interactive sound, which is sort of like a given that's part of the reality in there. And then interaction in relation to the other person. So those were the 5 points that I had initially in my mind that I wanted to somehow explore. And I'm going to go through them real quickly, and maybe I'll show you a little bit how it's done on the other computer also. So about the pseudo multiplayer, it's why I'm not calling it an actual multiplayer is because I don't have any server or any network in it. So I'm just using OSC signals to transfer the data. I mean, it's going through Ethernet cable and it's going through a router, but I don't have anything. I have no idea how multiplayer games actually work, so I had to do something with the tools I sort of had. I didn't know how to use OSC signals either, but I learned that and it was actually pretty easy. But yeah, this is sort of like, it's not a real multiplayer. I have to know the IP address of the other person, like I have to manually put it in. I can't, well, I could set it up with someone from the other side of the world, but I think it would be pretty hard to do that. And also with the OSC, I have to live with the limitations in transfer rate, because I know Jonke knows a lot more about this, but for some reason you can't really transfer more than 25 messages per second, so the virtual reality is rendering at 90 frames per second, and I can transfer data in 25 frames per second. So there's not latency in there, but you just, well, if you have tried it, you can see that if you move your hand and it kind of creates this sort of cloud or flowers or something in there, and it's not happening like all the time. You have those like small islands of the things, and that's because of the transfer rate, because I'm actually drawing those things only 25, or not drawing, but I'm actually calling the location of those things only 25 times per second, even though it's rendering at 90 frames per second. But yeah, that's technical. And yeah, also I wanted to explore this possibility of using the virtual reality or the HTC Vive as part of something else than just what you can see here on the headset. So using OSC signals is pretty useful in various other situations, like controlling Macs, for example. I created this sort of like demonstration that's going to be a dance piece in the future maybe, where you can move a moving light head with a moving headlight. Okay. You can move that with your controller, and it sort of like follows you, and if you press the button you can just point to a wall and it'll follow the position you're pointing it at. So it's really useful to learn about OSC signals because it's useful for real life, or like, once again, real life, but physical world things also, and also moving or controlling sound with it. So I could play like Ableton Live. I have some live set there, and I can use OSC signals to control everything in there. Okay, so shared virtual space. This is sort of like, I don't even know what I was thinking about when I was writing these notes down. Or I know about the first one, but the two other ones are a little bit mystery to me also. But maybe we can figure them out. But yeah, like I said, it's different than other existing multiplayer games, not in the technical sense, but also in the sense that you don't have any physical presence in there. Like, you don't have any avatar in there. Like, if you play any multiplayer games, usually you have some sort of character that you control there, and usually have some sort of, or you see the others as some sort of robots or humanoids or whatever they are, but they always have a body. So in my thing, I didn't want to have any sort of body or anything for the person, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later also. That's one of the things that I've found that interest me, like losing the body. What does it mean to share a virtual space? This is sort of like just a question. I'm not going to even answer it, but I'm thinking about it. Like, what does it mean that you go into a virtual space? You're in two different physical spaces, or you could have like 10 different people in different physical spaces, but you share the same virtual space. And that's a really interesting philosophical question to me. I have no answers to that, but I just felt like it's important to mention that. And it's sort of relation to like chat rooms or something like that, where you communicate in a different way, but still you're present in the same virtual space in a way. And then isolation versus coexistence. This is also pretty interesting about virtual reality. Like yesterday, I think Joris was talking about the sort of like isolation that you create, and there was what was the name of it? The opera where you put the headset on and you're kind of isolated from the world, and that's what happens with this kind of virtual reality. So for me, that's a good thing. I like the isolation. I like the thing that you can create sort of like a different reality. I know that I'm a young escapist or something like that, but I think it can be also a positive thing. But I'm not that interested in like augmented reality or mixed reality or that sort of stuff. I mean, they are interesting, but for me, it's more interesting to create those worlds where you can bend to laws of physics. Like you can create some actual space where you can go, where you don't have to follow the rules of this world. So that's, for me, that's more interesting than adding something to our existing world, because in my opinion, the existing world we have is already pretty interesting. So yeah, visualizing movement is one of those key things that I had in mind, and that I also used that in Ocean Vortex, and to some extent also in Modern Ancient. So it's something, oh yeah, wow, Jalo wants to update. Okay. So yeah, that's something that has been an interest to me for a long time. And in this particular piece, because you have those two persons in there, I was thinking about different way of communicating. And in this case, it's sort of in relation to dance. So I don't know, I'm sort of like a socially awkward person. You might not notice it, but I really am. I just have a mask on all the time, so it seems like I'm really confident. But I'm not really good at communicating like my inner feelings with people. So I was trying to somehow find a way to communicate with another person without having to actually see them, or without having actually to talk to them, or even write to them. So you can just be in the space and somehow find a coexistence. And yeah. And also one really interesting thing from like the history of art is the relationship to, because this is just a continuum of other forms of art. So I would call this sort of like a futurist daydream, where you want to visualize the movement, and you want to somehow make the movement more interesting than the actual thing that is in there, or the actual physical object. The movement is in the key part. So yeah, I think this is, if some of those Italian futurists from the early 20th century would be here, they would be quite thrilled to try the HTC Vive. I'm not saying that they would be thrilled about the thing I did, but maybe they would. Yeah, this is sort of like, I don't know if it's inhumane to say this, but I'm interested in reducing a person to only few parameters. So I'm not saying that we should, in this like normal life that we have, that we should be reducing ourselves. But for me, it's really interesting, where does the feeling of something being humane or something being a person, where does that come from? Like, how many parameters do you have to have for a thing to remind you of a living thing? Like if you have, for example, if you're in there with the other person and you only see the movement of their hand, do you feel that that's another person if you don't know that it's another person? And can you see the difference between sort of like an algorithm doing some pictures or some motion in there, or can you recognize a real person from that algorithm? So that's one of those things that I don't have any answer to it, or any, I don't know about that too much, but it's just an interesting thing to me, that what happens when you sort of take the body away and when you reduce the person to just like few parameters. Sort of like what happens with the Kinect or something. You can see the sort of like stick figure in there, and I think there's something really interesting in it. At the same time, it's sort of like, I don't know, nauseating. And yeah, this is, I think this is the most awkward part of the whole lecture here. I know Kempi is enjoying this. Yeah, interactive sound. I'm just a really bad sound designer. I'm going to admit it. For this piece, I created the sounds on the last couple of days. That was partly because of technical problems. I'm going to talk about them a little bit more. But partly because of technical problems, but partly because I just don't know how to do sound. It's really big issue for me. But yeah, that's why I went to the virtual reality where I don't have to, no one expects me to know anything, so everything I do is like, it seems really cool. But with sound I have to actually know something, and if I can make like white noise or something, not too many people are going to be excited about that. But yeah, interactive sound, it doesn't have to be too like big scale. Even if you have like those sound sources that are placed in the world, that if you move your head, they won't move with you. So if you have, for example, I had a virtual speaker here in the virtual reality, and when I turn my head, it would still sound like the sound comes here. That already makes the world so much more alive than if you're just watching it, and when you turn your head, the whole soundscape moves with you. So yeah, it doesn't have to be too complex for it to make the world feel more alive. And even like smaller sounds, like even if you just move a little bit and there's a little bit feedback, like auditive feedback, even that makes the world feel more alive. It doesn't have to be like explosions and I don't know, some huge sounds. And one of the problems is that you want to have the interaction with the sound, and you don't want to make it too obvious. And at the same time, you don't want to make it impossible to recognize. So if you, for example, in Ocean Vortex, in the beginning, if you move your hand, you can destroy the world around you, and there's a sound coming from the controller. And I thought it was going to be too blunt, that people are just like, as soon as they move the controller, they make the connection between the sound and the movement. But that didn't actually happen. So it's pretty, I don't have enough data to tell you how to make an interactive sound that actually works. Because for some people it works, and for some other people it doesn't work. And I think the problem is partly in that, I'm talking about my works now. In my works, everything is really abstract. So you don't really have any real life example how things should sound, or how, for example, if you move your hand, you don't hear any sound in this real world. So it might be really hard to come up with the connection of moving your hand and it making a sound. But if you had sort of like a, I don't know, alarm clock or something in your hand, and then you would make the sound like if it's ticking in there, and you definitely make the connection between the visual object and the sound, because you know that from the real world. But yeah, that's once again one of those questions that I'm still trying to find answers to. Maybe someone has answers to them, and maybe they will share them with me so I can be a better artist. And yeah, limitations in knowledge about spatial audio. Spatial audio is not anything too simple. Like it's at the same time it's really simple. Like everyone knows that you go into a cave and it sounds like a cave, and you go to a room full of pillows and it sounds a room full of pillows. But recreating those is actually not that easy. There are tools that make it easier, but I don't know how to use those tools. I learned that also, that you have really good tools where you can set all the parameters of the materials you have in a space, but I just couldn't get those to work correctly. So that's, yeah. So that's part of a lot of technical and personal artistic problems with the interactive sound. But yeah, that's I think that's for another day. Yeah, I'm going to show you, if I have time, I'm going to show a little bit how the world is created in the game engine. So I'll show you also the audio part there. So interaction in relation to the other person, and this is sort of like, it sums up the other points. It's basically, I've said almost everything I've said relates to this, like how, if you interact with the world, how does that relate to interaction with the other person? Like if you move your hand and there's a sound, does the other person in the room realize that, okay, now the other person is moving their hand and that's making the sound and they must be at that position? one of the things I was thinking a lot about, I don't know why I put it under this, but it's sort of communication, interaction, that art is communication in like its most basic form. You can disagree with this, but if you think like cave paintings or like the really first forms of art, it was used for communication. And at least for me, I use art for communication, whether it's political or whether it's somehow in relation to bigger themes in the world or changing the world or anything like that, or whether it's just like my personal feelings of what kind of person I am and what kind of person is the other person whose art I'm looking at. So I feel that art is communication in many ways. So yeah, that's also a big subject, so not going to talk about too much. But sort of related to that, I feel like I mentioned earlier, the chat rooms. So this is sort of where the idea came from, like I said, about the problem with communication. And for me, internet has always been sort of, I don't know how you would say it, sort of a place where you can hide yourself in a way, that you can communicate with people and you can be in a relationship with people, but you don't have to meet them face to face. You can have those like screens between you. And I think it's, at the same time, it's really bad because now I've learned that way and it's really hard to actually meet people. But at the same time, if you're already lonely and you don't want to meet people, at least you can meet them online. So it's sort of like a blessing and a curse at the same time. But yeah, sort of the idea for this came from the like I mentioned before, the need or the, I don't know, to want to create a new form, or not even a new form, but discover some other forms of communication. They don't have to be like, I don't have to write that I feel sad or I feel happy, or I don't have to go to see my friend and tell them how I feel, but I can just go to some anonymous space in a way, but at the same time I can be wholly present in there and feel the presence of the other person, so I'm not alone at the same time. So that's part of why it's called Alone Together. So I have like 15 minutes left, so should I... Maybe I'll just continue with this and then I'll show a little bit from the computer. So these are the things that I found from doing these three. Well, I don't know if I can say three things, because actually I have created like 120 different things, but they're just scratched and they're just somewhere in the computer and they're long gone, destroyed from the world because they weren't good enough or they transferred into something else. But yeah, one of the most important things for me in virtual reality is that recreating reality is not interesting to me. Once again, this is just my personal opinion, but I don't feel like I want to create, for example, I don't want to create forest in a virtual reality because I want to go an actual forest. That's more interesting. But creating something that doesn't exist in our world, or at least stuff that we won't see in this world, I think creating that is really interesting. And part of that is a simple visual world. So it's like if you try to create photorealism, you usually just drop into the uncanny valley, where it's sort of like you sort of see that it's representing the reality, but at the same time it's not convincing enough, so it just feels weird and a little off. So I feel like you maybe saw from the pictures, and maybe you see here in the headset, that worlds that I create are just like really visually simple, and it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I have no idea how to do like 3D modeling. It's just an artistic decision. Wink, wink. But yeah, it's a lot easier for someone who wants to make their own stuff but doesn't know anything what they're doing. So it's one thing that I have to. One thing less that I have to learn, or not even one thing less. If you want to create something that is actually photorealistic, you have to know how to create the models and the textures and the lighting and physics, and it's just yeah. If you have like modern video game, there's 50 people doing those. So for me, it's not interesting to spend my time learning that, because it's more interesting to see the world created from those white cubes or from lines or something like that, because you can't have those in real life. And this is one of those more like in relation to performing arts, is that isolation and disconnection from one's body creates interesting movement. And this is something that I realized quite early on my journey to the virtual world, but something that is always coming back. Like if you see someone in the virtual world, they sort of lose touch with the social norms that they are used to. Like usually when you won't see people like going like this or like crawling on the floor or something like that. But in the virtual world, it's pretty common to see things like that, even from people who are usually pretty modest. And I'm not saying that people who there's different kinds of people. Some people are just really normal on the virtual world, but some people just lose control totally. And I'm not saying that either of those is better than the other. So, but it's interesting what it creates, and there's pretty much, or there's much things you could do with that fact, that you can make the person lose their fears in the normal social culture we live in. Then scale is a powerful tool. This is something I realized when I tried this sort of experience where people can create scenes with photogrammetry, which is a technique where you take photographs from real life objects, and then on the computer you create 3D models of them. So this is sort of like trying to recreate the reality in a way, but at the same time you can use the scale as a really powerful tool. The thing that I was most impressed about was this bowl full of potato chips, and not just because it was potato chips, but because of the scale. Because you could just, you had the bowl in normal size in a table, or on a table, and then you had the bowl like 20 meters in diameter, and you could just go there and climb on top of the potato chips and stuff. And it was, I don't know, it was just really interesting how you can create those normal life objects, but in a completely, you can see them in completely different ways. And I created something like my own room, but it's like the size of an ant or something like that. So that's pretty interesting also to me. And this is also something that we could talk about for the rest of the year. And well, there's not too much this year left. We could talk this year and the next year also about the illusion of virtual reality. And I have to thank Mateus for this, because we were doing, or I was asked to continue the work of the great Eero Nieminen, thank you, for the art installation called Hold, which was a video installation, and it was sort of creating a virtual reality, different than this kind of thing, but you had like 360 projection. And we were talking a lot about the threshold of human, or the threshold of the reality and the virtual reality. So the one thing that is that or not the one thing, I got a lot of ideas from that, but I think the biggest thing of all was the fact that virtual reality only exists in our head. Like if you go to, or if you take the goggles and put them on your head, it's just pixels on a flat screen. But your brain creates the space where you go into, and all the sounds that are in there, they're just like, I don't know, sound waves. But your brain creates the virtual reality, so I think that's pretty interesting. And once again, I'm just throwing this to you, and you can make out of it whatever you want. So yeah, what's next? I sort of feel like that cat. It's just not a flower, it's just like I put this on and I'm like but yeah, it's there's plenty of stuff I have still in mind what I'm going to do, but I really couldn't just write them down, because there's just, I don't know, I think my mind is already in the vacation, so I couldn't really do that. But I still have 5 minutes left or something like that, or what's
Yeah, you have
Yeah.
5 minutes.
So if you guys are interested, you don't have to be interested. You can say that stop talking and go away. But if you're interested, I can show you a little bit about the technical side of this thing that I created. Well,
Yes.
okay, someone said yes. First come, first serve. Okay, so I have to change computer now. Just a second. And also I have to turn my back on you guys now. So the game engine I'm using is called Unreal Engine, and it's developed by Epic Games. And yeah, it's for me it's really useful tool. Some people say that it's more complicated than Unity, and those people are definitely right. But at the same time, I'm going to show you why I chose to use Unreal Engine, because for me, I have no experience in coding. I have no experience or no background in coding or anything like that. I've created like a web page when I was maybe 12 years old that had maybe a color and some text, and that's the extent of my knowledge in coding before I started to do this virtual reality thing. So this is the thing that I created for this seminar. So the thing in Unreal that made me use this game engine is that I know that there are people here who use Max as their tool, Max MSP or Max 7 or whatever you call it. I don't even know what the name of the program is. Yeah, you can sort of like use the same visual coding that you use in Max, or not the same, but it's sort of similar node-based. I can show you, this is the scene that I have. Actually, it's here. So yeah, it's pretty simple. You only have black things, but for the audio sake, I created this white cube here where you can, which was supposed to act as the space creating the echoes and stuff, but yeah, it didn't really work. But it's still there. And there was a lot of other stuff here also, and I deleted all of those, so I can't really show you them. But this is the code here is called blueprints. So when you create something, you create blueprints, and those blueprints have the instructions, the things, how they should work, and what kind of values should they move to, or what kind of values should they listen to and stuff. So this is the level blueprint. So basically everything that is happening in this experience is here. And I have to apologize for it being such a mess, but I didn't really have time to make it clear. There's some good comments here, like there was maybe some problem here, or maybe not. Now I don't know if I corrected the problem, or if it still exists, but it works, so it's just there. But yeah, this is basically how you create stuff or create the code in there. And you have event begin play. So when you press play, these things happen. You come here and the signal goes here, and then it executes this, and then it executes this, and so on, so forward. And the other thing is you have event tick. So every frame you do these things that are after the event tick. And there's a lot of mathematics here and a lot of things here that are not too interesting to many people, but for me I get sort of pleasure from this. So I really enjoy doing the code also, even though most of the time I have no idea what I'm doing. So I have two screens where in one I have this scene that I'm seeing what kind of objects I have, and on the other screen I have the code, and then on my laptop I have YouTube where someone is telling me what to do, and so I'm doing that, and then I'm like sort of recreating it in the completely different and completely wrong ways. But yeah, this is basically the code. Then I have stuff like you can't really see anything here, but this thing is mostly based on particle systems. Jokke and Teemu were talking about particle systems yesterday. So this thing is mostly based on particle systems. I have like 5 different particle systems there. You can't really see anything here because you would need to have movement. Let's see if I can actually. I put this to 0, and let's put this to 1000. Now you can see something in there. Well, it's not too much. But yeah, you have 1000 particles in there. You won't be recognizing those as particles, but they're still there. And then yeah, these are just some things. Do I have something interesting here? The OSC receiver. This is something that I tried to do for the sound. I promised to talk about the sound a little bit. And there's a new feature in this game engine that you actually have built-in modular synthesizer and granular synthesizer. And I tried to use those, but I just couldn't get them to work as good as I wanted to. And as you can see, it's still in pretty early stages. So this is just setting up the granular synthesizer, and then you have to create the interaction to it later. So it's pretty clumsy to work with this at the moment. It's going to get easier in the future, but for this project I felt like I couldn't get it to work simple enough, so I just did something else. And that's how it usually goes. I try something out, it doesn't work, and maybe it works in a completely different way that I expected, and then I just leave it there because it feels like, okay, this is interesting, I leave it there. But yeah, it's sort of like, you can definitely see that I'm not a professional here. For example, if I sort of play this, I have to manually input the IP address of the other computer so I can actually get or send the data here, from here to there. And yeah, this is my UI here. And it works pretty good here if I play it in the editor, but when I make it a standalone application, you can't even see what you're typing in, so you have to type blindly. And I had a moment where I was a little bit, I don't know, worried about it not working at all, because I couldn't get data to transfer, and I was running between the 4th floor and the 6th floor, and nothing was transferring from the other computer to the other. And then I realized that I had a keyboard where it didn't have a shift key on the left side. So because I didn't know what I was writing, I never wrote like a double, what is it called, like double point or the hunks or whatever. I didn't have those in the address where I should have those. So that's why it didn't work. It was not in the code, it was just my, I don't know, unableness to read a keyboard. But yeah, that's just one of the examples on how thin ice I'm walking on when I'm creating this stuff. I have no idea if it's gonna work or not. And for this thing that I did, I only was sure that it's gonna work like last Thursday when we got the new computer here at VES. I didn't know if the communication between the computers would work the way I wanted to, and it worked. So I was pretty happy about that. But yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff that I could talk about, but I don't know if it's that interesting. And I think we're over time already. So I'm just gonna plug this back in for a while so we can watch the cat a little bit more. Do we have the cat? Yeah, there it is. So, yeah, do you have any questions? I'm just going to put the next animal there, because I know there was a lot of stuff in between that was only black and white and text, so that's pretty boring. So I wanted to have some sort of nice and cozy ending for this my part of this thing. So yeah, there's a dog. He's happy. Do you have
Thank
any
you, Kalle.
questions?
Can I suggest that we could address questions now concerning your part, and then slide to this kind of ending discussion, because it's anyway linked there, and hopefully if after that we will finish the ending discussion, if there's a possibility to try out.
Yeah, of course.
So if some people are in a tight schedule to go somewhere, so they can leave, and if they have time, they can still experience the setup.
So it's going to be here, and the other one's going to be in the music studio. I still have to set the IP addresses and stuff, but I mean, please come and test it if you haven't. And
yeah. So please, if you have something to ask, from Kalle.
Yep.
Yeah, Thomas.
I have one comment. Don't be too modest about the multiplayer functionality. In technical sense, it's actually coolest thing in your production. You actually managed to use this kind of sound control protocol that is not designed for that purpose to really make it multiply. It's very kind of hacker-like approach. I wouldn't be kind of
yeah, and I have to thank you for helping me with that also.
Really cool stuff.
Thank you. Also, I just want to say, I wanted to say this beforehand, but you know, people who usually are a little bit scared to say thank you, but I really have to thank people. Like I thanked you also. I have to thank Seija and Ufo, of course, and Kossu for being Kossu, and Tuomas for believing in me, and Kimmo for being here. So everyone at VES, and also Sofia, Johanna, and Kempi for helping me testing this out, because testing it by myself was impossible. So at least those people. I'm sorry if I forgot to thank someone, but thank you. Any more questions?
Can we test it?
Yeah, it's right here, and just yeah, when we wrap up the conversation, we can.
So it's still on, so you can test it, like so we can like have the discussion first, and then if some people are leaving, so they can all participate in the discussion.
Yeah.
Yes, Tommy.
Yeah, I'm sharing a lot of interest that you have, and you mentioned earlier about sharing presence and how to know if someone else is present. So you might be interested in. I mentioned earlier this Steve Benford from 1998. So he has this framework of 3 axes. It's transportation, artificiality, and the often forgotten spatiality.
Yeah.
And he's talking a lot like if you are in a discussion forum, so kind of like a very low level question of spatiality is that you can see some icon that some other user is present right there with you at the same time.
That's true.
And then when you go more into these actual virtual realities and actually observing other users there and these questions, whether it's not an other user or not, and then of course you are approaching the Turing test.
Yeah.
So that is this an NPC or an actual personality?
That's true.
Yeah, Thomas.
Yeah, I would say that most of the time when we see pictures or videos or examples of video games or virtual reality systems and the things that people have done with those, they sometimes they have too wide audience, kind of like the thinking is that everybody has some kind of experience about this, and it's so widely targeted that it loses some kind of human touch.
Yeah.
And I think that when I was trying and playing your Ocean Vortex work, I think that your own touch was the thing that made it more art than something else, because it was I think it was made for yourself, and I could be part of something that you made for yourself. So it became much more humane.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah, that's
most,
true.
Most of the games or stuff that I've tried before.
Yeah. I mean that's why I think most important and most interesting games are indie games, which are developed just for the developer, and some people enjoy, like the Beginner's Guide and Stanley Parable. But this is sort of like in relation to the question about art versus entertainment. I don't want to go into that discussion, but usually games are made how they are because people want to play those kind of games. Like you said, that it loses the touch to humanity when there's only like money in mind when you create games. I'm not saying that all game companies are like that, but there's a lot of games that are made the way they are just because people want those kind of games. People want to play shooters for some reason, and that's why there are so many shooters on the market. But yeah, it's I agree.
I can make a notion in between. I happen to know a little bit about your process, like you were developing this, and and I got interested of the small incidents you had with the regarding the interaction and there was happening this kind of a failure, which was actually by accidentally like improving this kind of like a spatial or giving more motivation. Actually, it is making it more like a spatially interactive or bodily interactive. And I think it's linked to the discussions like we had like earlier about the power of the failures or accidents in a way, if you recognize the possibilities there, and especially interaction-wise.
Yeah. I mean, in Finnish we have saying "moka on lahja," so it basically means that failure is actually a gift. And the thing Tommy mentioned was that I actually don't know if it's still in there because I kind of fixed it because I tried it, then I put it back in, but it didn't work the same way. So, but anyway, there was this problem that if you were standing still and you were trying to write something, it wouldn't appear there. But when you started moving, then you could see how how the movement actually goes, and it was pretty weird because, I mean, it sort of was like in direct relationship to the idea that I don't want to create another platform where you can write or where you can talk with people. So it was sort of like not allowing people to write in there, and it was completely by accident. And I don't know if it's still in there. So I hope it is because it was actually pretty good. But it was one of those things where I have no idea what's happening, but it's happening or it's working for my advantage. So why not just use it? But yeah, I wanted to try it if it works the other way, and now I'm kind of mixed in between that should it be this way or this way. There's just two vectors that I need to like subtract from other, and I can't remember which way they were. So yeah, I don't know. But it's true that it's really interesting and really meaningful to have those kind of failures in creating art.
Okay, Jonas?
Well, you said you don't consider yourself a very technical person, but this is, well, for maybe most of us, it's quite advanced, but it's still nice to recognize that kind of the content is still maybe the most essential thing there.
Yeah, I hope it's that way.
Yeah, and well, I tried that yesterday, and it's in all its simplicity, it's very pleasurable to work with that, and such works kind of, it also represents very well what we, the average people, could do with the virtual reality.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, I mean, I don't think
when you don't have to kind of think the technical stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I don't think I'm more like technically advanced than many other people who are studying in this school. But I think I am more willing to spend my time watching at YouTube and watching at tutorials and trying stuff out than some other persons. I'm more willing to bang my head against the wall in that way. I mean, some people are. I'm not in that way in artistic ways. I'm not saying that I'm a better artist because I want to bang my head into the wall, but I'm just more willing to spend my time looking into the technology, and it's giving me impulses, and I'm trying to give impulses back to the technology also. But yeah, like you said, it's I still want the content to come first, and the technology it's nice, and I love it, but at the same time it's not something, even if I had the most technically advanced thing and it would be hollow and empty, I wouldn't be happy with that. So if there's really good content or really good idea and it's not working at all, I'm still more happy with that. That's at least the person I'm trying to be.
Okay, Riku-Pekka.
Yeah, I think I find very fascinating your questions and thoughts about connecting with your body in virtual reality, and I think there is something very interesting also in tradition of games.
Yeah.
You have first point games, and then you can see something in the back.
Yeah.
of your character in games. So what can it be in that environment also?
Yeah, I mean, perspective is really interesting because in the virtual reality, most of the things you put you in the first person, so you are like the active element in there, but you could also be like, I don't know, someone who's just watching the things there, like from an isometric perspective or something. So it's a really interesting question. And what does it mean if you put the, I don't want to say player, experiencer is that the word even, but you put the person who's watching the thing or experiencing the thing, you put them to another position other than just being like the active thing in the middle of the stuff that is happening. If you put them somewhere else, just watching all the action happen. So yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think we wrap it up from your part and thank you and continue the ending discussion. But thank you.
Thank you.